In 1513, an exiled Florentine official, stripped of power and tortured, began writing a book that would forever overturn political thought. Niccolò Machiavelli accomplished what seemed unthinkable. He separated politics from morality and looked at power as it truly is, not as it should be in some ideal world. While philosophers debated virtuous rulers in the comfort of their libraries, Machiavelli met with kings and generals, organized military campaigns, and watched how good intentions crumbled in the face of reality. He saw that merciful leaders lost, while pragmatic ones won. His conclusions shocked his contemporaries and continue to spark controversy today, but they laid the foundation for modern political science and gave us the tools to understand power in its rawest, most unvarnished form. Get comfortable, my dear listener. I'll do my best to surprise you and tell you what you don't yet know. Part 1. The Real Deal. Machiavelli totally turned the tables on the usual political theories people were used to. Before him, most thinkers were all about the perfect utopian governments with leaders who supposedly acted on some divine wisdom. But Machiavelli wasn't buying it. He was more interested in the real truth of how power operates in the world, even if it was messy or morally tricky. His fresh take on things stemmed from his time working as a top official in the Florentine Republic. From 1498 to 1512, he served as the second chancellor and secretary to the Ten of War. This job had him bouncing around on diplomatic missions, meeting kings and generals, organizing military plans, and handling political chaos back home. While others were cooking up theories in cushy libraries, Machiavelli was out in the thick of it, seeing how power really works. What he learned shook up all those old comfy ideas about leadership from the likes of Augustine and Aquinas. Turns out, leaders who leaned hard on mercy, forgiveness, and trust often ended up losing. Meanwhile, those who were tough and pragmatic brought peace and stability to their realms. That whole idea of being good, leading to good governance, wasn't just wrong, it was risky. Those nice guys clinging to being good usually made pretty terrible leaders. Just look at Piero Soderini. He was at the helm of the Florentine Republic for much of Machiavelli's career. Soderini was basically a poster boy for being a decent guy, honest, merciful, trusting, always played by the book. He treated his political foes fairly, kept giving them chances. But when things got rough, he hesitated, trying to be patient and persuasive instead of taking action. His kindness was his downfall. His adversaries played on his virtues, ultimately toppling him and his republic. Soderini's goodness was his weak spot, and his people paid the price for his steadfast morality. This wasn't a one-off thing. During Machiavelli's era, Italy was a total mess, with foreign armies from France, Spain, and Germany fighting over it, and local rulers couldn't unite to fight back effectively. The political theories floating around then were utterly useless. Philosophers could harp on about justice and mercy, but they didn't have a word to say about stopping invasions or putting down rebellions. The gap between lofty ideals and the real needs of a ruler had become so wide that political theory was pointless for anyone actually trying to govern. Machiavelli set out to bridge that gap with a new perspective on politics. His real truth approach meant studying successful leaders, unbothered by their moral standings. He examined figures like Moses and Theseus, as well as contemporaries like Cesare Borgia and Ferdinand of Aragon. Instead of focusing on their niceness, He cared about their effectiveness. How did they grab, keep, and grow power? How did they handle enemies, global threats, and sudden upheaval? What personal traits helped them succeed while others failed? These practical questions led to insights that transformed political thinking and paved the way for modern statecraft. Yet, some of his conclusions left traditional moralists in a tizzy, and Machiavelli ended up being seen as the bad guy in many circles. When people started shifting their focus from dreamy ideas to the hard truths of the real world, that's when many experts think political science found its own footing. Before Niccolò Machiavelli showed up, politics was mostly lumped in with moral philosophy or even theology. It was all about teaching what's right and fostering spiritual growth. But Machiavelli turned it around. Politics became about really looking at what's going on, testing new ideas, and creating theories to explain and predict real political happenings. This big change paved the way for everything, from how we understand international relations today to how we analyze voting patterns and the structure of political systems. However, this change also kicked off a huge intellectual debate. If succeeding in politics means ignoring traditional moral values, what does that mean for the relationship between power and justice? Machiavelli brought up this tough question without giving a clear answer, leaving future thinkers to wrestle with balancing political realism and moral principles. Part 2. Machiavelli's political mindset was crafted from a sharp and forward-thinking look at how humans behave, way ahead of its time. What he noticed about how people act wasn't really paralleled in detail until nearly 400 years later, when experimental psychology came to the forefront. Yet, his insights into human nature weren't just about being skeptical or having a low opinion of folks. He dug much deeper, examining how our mental biases, feelings, and the sway of society shape our political actions. This straight-shooting view of psychology turned into the bedrock for future thinkers who leaned on Machiavelli's work, making it crucial to get what he discovered about human thought and how that informed his political concepts. Nowadays, fields like behavioral economics and political psychology have pretty much confirmed Machiavelli's core ideas on how folks make decisions under pressure. Right at the center of his psychological perspective lies something we might call conditional loyalty. People aren't inherently wicked or saintly. Instead, they're self-interested and react to what's happening around them. Folks behave well when it suits them, and poorly when they see some gain in doing so. So, if you understand the carrots and sticks people face, you can mostly foresee their actions. To promote good behavior, you need to craft systems and policies that reward it rather than punish bad behavior. Simply urging people to act morally won't cut it, because it pushes against what they see as beneficial to themselves. Machiavelli identified certain mental quirks that make humans a bit of a mismatch for conventional moral politics. First off, people tend to prefer immediate rewards over waiting for better outcomes down the road, even if the latter are more worthwhile. This want-it-now approach poses a real hurdle for leaders seeking support for policies that require short-term sacrifices for future gains. Think of voters nixing infrastructure projects that would be beneficial in the long haul, just because it means shelling out more taxes now, or backing military actions that seem like they'll solve problems quickly but could lead to bigger issues later. Leaders who ignore this bias and aim solely for long-term goals are bound to lose out to those who offer quicker results. Additionally, Machiavelli talked about what he termed ingratitude, a concept we now call the tendency of people to quickly adapt to improvements and start taking them for granted. A leader who ushers in peace and plenty might soon find that people forget the chaos of the past and start fussing over minor issues. Yet, any tiny setback can get pinned entirely on the current leader, regardless of the bigger picture. This bias leans in favor of leaders with flashy charm, offering big changes over those steady but less flashy leaders who steadily deliver results. Next, there's the widespread overconfidence bias in how people assess their own skills and judgment. Most believe they're above-average drivers, lovers, and judges of character. In the world of politics, this means folks often trust they can easily tell who's honest or dishonest, what's a good or bad policy, and who's a competent or incompetent leader. Such confidence sets the public up for being swayed by smooth talkers who know how to tap into our cognitive weaknesses. It also results in skepticism towards expert advice, especially if it clashes with gut instincts. Leaders who grasp this bias and tweak their messages accordingly tend to fare better than those who expect the public to reason things out. Finally, Machiavelli noted that humans are essentially imitators, guided more by their environment than abstract principles. People often mimic others, adopting behaviors from their surroundings rather than strictly following ideals. People seem to worry more about fitting in with their crowd than staying true to their own values. Basically, our actions get shaped by what our friends and the people around us expect, rather than by our own beliefs. So, if corruption becomes the norm in a political setup, even folks who are generally honest might start bending the rules just to avoid feeling out of place. On the other hand, when an organization makes honesty a priority and keeps tabs on it, people are more likely to act right, even if they sometimes think about taking shortcuts. This concept is central to why Machiavelli argued that good governance leans more on strong laws and institutions than on teaching people morals. He also pointed out what today's psychologists would call a fundamental attribution error in politics. When people hit a rough patch, they often blame the world around them. But when it happens to others, they're quick to say it's their own fault. This kind of thinking makes life tough for political leaders who want to keep their good name during hard times. Folks often blame leaders for things like economic struggles, natural disasters, or global issues, even if those are beyond their control. At the same time, people tend to credit themselves for their own successes, not realizing that effective governance might have played a part in their achievements. Understanding this bias helps explain why talented leaders might fall out of favor during bad times, while less skilled ones might remain popular when times are good, under conditions they didn't influence. It also shows how important it is for political leaders to not only craft good policies, but also manage public opinion and media stories with finesse. Part 3. Reimagining Virtue, a Radical Shift in Leadership. Among all of Machiavelli's thoughts, none has stirred up more chatter than his revolutionary take on what virtue means. Though the word Machiavelli uses might echo the virtue we're used to, it comes packed with a whole new layer of complexity. Traditionally, virtue was about sticking to what's good, regardless of the outcome, a lesson rooted in Christian beliefs and old-school philosophy. But for Machiavelli, virtue flips the script. It's about leveraging the right qualities and methods to hit your political targets based on what the situation calls for. This marks a major leap away from the usual Western political ideas, giving us a fresh lens to judge a leader's success. focusing on results rather than moral constraints. Old-fashioned virtue was built on 4 universal traits that were supposed to work anytime, anywhere. Prudence meant making calls laced with moral wisdom, thinking of the long-term spiritual effects. Justice was all about treating people according to set moral standards, putting ethical duties above political aspirations. Fortitude demanded guts, sticking by virtues even if it cost you personally or politically. And temperance was about reining in desires guided by reason and morals. These traits were believed to lead to a steady, exemplary character that others would look up to. The age-old belief held that righteousness would eventually win out because the universe supposedly backed just deeds. Good folks were supposed to flourish, while wrongdoers would eventually meet their end, thanks to this cosmic sense of justice. But Machiavelli tosses this idea out. His concept of virtue is all about flexing with the situation, not sticking rigidly to moral codes. A leader with this sort of virtue knows when being generous can push political aims or when being ruthless is necessary. They're honest when it helps forge alliances, but also savvy enough to use deception when it prevents bigger headaches. They know how to bide their time for strategic gain and when to act fast to avert disaster. This level of adaptability calls for sharp psychological skills, continually reading the room and crafting new approaches. This type of virtue goes beyond just bending morals or being ethically limber. For starters, leaders need what Machiavelli would call a clear view of human nature. It involves seeing people as they truly are, not as we wish them to be or as moral codes dictate they should be. Political blunders often happen when leaders project their values onto others, mistakenly thinking everyone shares their goals. Sharp leaders understand that motivations vary and tailor their strategies to fit those specific drivers. This requires deep emotional intelligence and the capacity to put personal biases aside for strategic planning. Additionally, Machiavellian virtue depends on a fluid understanding of morality through time. Whereas traditional virtue clung to unchanging principles, Machiavelli's take asks you to interpret the context and assess what's necessary at that moment. Sometimes a situation calls for quick, decisive actions, even if it means twisting usual rules. Other times, patience and long-term planning are more fitting, even if everyone else is itching for immediate results. Occasionally, bold power moves are in order, while at other times, quieter negotiations are wiser. Leaders skilled in this art can discern what each moment requires, tweaking their tactics to seize opportunities others might miss and avoid traps that ensnare less adaptable competitors. Okay? So, the whole idea of virtue isn't just sticking to one strict set of rules. It's more like managing different sets of morals depending on the situation you're in. Take a leader, for example. They might behave one way with their family and friends, with morals that sound a lot like Christian values. But then, they switch things up when it comes to politics. This isn't just about being fake or confused about what's right. It's realizing that different roles need different moral approaches, although these roles can sometimes bump heads. What makes sense with family may not work when talking to other countries' leaders. The type of trust and forgiveness that's great with friends could be dangerous in dealing with political opponents who might be gunning for you. Great leaders can juggle these conflicting morals without losing their cool or totally ditching their ethics. They stay grounded in their principles while adjusting their actions to fit each role. Now, Machiavelli had this thing about the hardest part of virtue being in tune with the times. What leaders need to do changes with history. Some periods value certain traits, while in others, those same traits might not be appreciated. When everything's smooth and stable, leaders who focus on building consensus, sticking to the rules, and making gradual progress end up on top. But during crazy and messy times, it's those who act decisively, shake things up, and set new paths who lead effectively. The tricky part is that a leader who's perfect for one situation usually gets stuck when circumstances change. That's why leaders who excel in wartime can struggle when peace rolls around, and those who manage well during peace may trip up when chaos erupts. The ultimate form of virtue would mean adapting your entire style to fit the times while remaining true to who you are. Machiavelli thought this kind of total adaptability was theoretically possible but exceedingly rare, which makes being a political leader super challenging and is why truly exceptional leaders are few and far between throughout history. Part 4. Machiavelli dives into the chaos and unpredictability of political life, exploring how chance affects human control and decision-making. His take is one of the earliest deep dives into the uncertainty that marks politics. Ideas we have today about how to make decisions, strategy, and dealing with risks echo what Machiavelli had to say about navigating unpredictable situations. The concepts he introduced around fortune have influenced everything from how the military strategizes to how businesses plan and how individuals seek personal growth. But scholars still debate the deeper philosophical points about fortune that Machiavelli raised. They're not fully understood yet. Back in the Middle Ages, people generally thought of fortune as God's handiwork, showing up in what seemed like random happenings. It was either a divine test of morals, good people getting rewarded eventually and wrongdoers facing bad luck, or a way to show that the randomness of life had a deeper spiritual meaning beyond what people could grasp. This view suggested fortune was predictable, even if no one knew exactly when things would happen. Political leaders believing this might think their virtuous actions would eventually lead to rewards, interpreting setbacks as either a test from above or a reminder to grow morally. It was like having a safety net of faith that integrity would lead to success. Machiavelli, though, had a different take. He focused on what he saw happening around him, setting aside religious views. To him, fortune was random and powerful, unconcerned with human values. The good might suffer, and the bad might prosper by sheer luck. This wasn't a failure to understand a divine plan. It was a real feature of political life. Natural disasters and economic changes don't align themselves with human morality. So, he thought leaders should craft plans to adapt to or even capitalize on randomness, not assume that good actions would necessarily lead to good results. To explain fortune in politics, Machiavelli used the metaphor of a river. He compared fortune to a wild river that floods unpredictably, causing destruction. But during calm times, smart people can build defenses to handle and use the river's power for their benefit later. This metaphor emphasized a few key ideas. Preparing in calm times is crucial to survive the storms. While you can't control fortune directly, you can shape its effects by planning ahead, and those same natural forces that cause chaos for the unprepared can benefit those ready to harness them. The way Machiavelli talked about fortune also reflected some Renaissance ideas about human nature and power, viewed differently today. He described fortune using gender, portraying it as a woman who preferred bold, sometimes aggressive actions from young men. While this language might feel outdated, the underlying idea about risk-taking and spotting opportunities still holds. Fortune tends to favor leaders who make decisive moves in uncertain scenarios instead of waiting for all details to become clear. It rewards those ready to take smart risks more than those who always play it safe. Ultimately, the people who thrive are those who stay adaptable and navigate rapid changes, rather than getting bogged down by the complexity and uncertainty of life. Machiavelli's reflections on life's unpredictability aren't just high-minded musings. They offer practical advice that stands the test of time in diverse political settings. One key takeaway is that leaders shouldn't rely on just one source of power. They need to diversify, ensure legitimacy, and gather support so that any unexpected event doesn't topple their entire setup. Think about the concept of gathering up resources, energy, and political influence. With these in your back pocket, you're ready to leap at any unexpected opportunities or tackle any crisis that comes your way. It's wise to prepare for various future scenarios rather than just hope things keep going smoothly. When times get tough, it's crucial not to freeze. Instead, being quick-thinking and emotionally resilient helps you adapt without longing for how things used to be. It's also crucial to create systems that function smoothly, regardless of who's in charge or what the circumstances are, not just depending on your personal charm or unique style. One of the key insights from Machiavelli's thoughts on fortune is realizing how people can navigate life's limitations, striking a balance between being overly optimistic and falling into despair. While leaders can't control random chance, with foresight, agility, and smart planning, they can influence how it impacts them. This understanding offers a chance for leaders to make real strides without relying on magic from their leadership alone. Success in leadership isn't just about who you are or what you know, but how those qualities mesh with unpredictable circumstances that nobody can fully foresee. Grasping this interaction helps in making better judgments about political effectiveness and setting achievable goals for strong leadership. It's not just about hoping that good intentions will naturally lead to success. Part 5. The Prince and the Discourses on Livy. These writings give us a detailed peek into how leadership, the way systems work, and what people are capable of, shift and change depending on whether we're looking at a monarchy or a republic. A lot of folks know about the Prince and might think Machiavelli is all about supporting dictatorships. But if you really get into it, you'll see he's actually weighing monarchies against republics, highlighting the pros and cons of each depending on where society's at. The tug-of-war between these books brings up big questions about human behavior, how societies develop, and how individual greatness can go hand in hand with group success, issues that are still fueling political debates today. The Prince zooms in on rulers who've got to turn chaos into order, hold on to power when things get rocky, and push through changes even when folks are fighting back. In these scenarios, a leader needs to make quick decisions, wield authority smartly, and use force when sweet talk isn't doing the trick. Princes have to hone their wits and resilience to manage tough political situations and play mind games like pros. They can't really rely on institutions or laws, since those might be in shambles or missing altogether. Instead, they need to build new systems almost through sheer determination, keeping them running with a mix of fear, respect, and rewards for key players. This makes a prince's rule kind of a one-person operation, hinging heavily on their unique style and talents, which aren't easy to pass on to the next leader. On the flip side, the discourses shifts focus to how republics can harness everyone's smarts, distribute power safely, and keep political life buzzing over the long haul. Successful republics lock down methods that stay effective no matter who's in power and motivate citizens to contribute for the common good. They also set up barriers to prevent any one person or group from monopolizing power and messing things up. This kind of system is potentially more stable and better at handling complex challenges than an autocratic one. However, it can freeze up during a crisis, get corrupt when things are going well, and descend into bickering when there's disagreement. Republics thrive when citizens have enough civic-mindedness to support community-oriented institutions and go along with collective choices, even if they're tough to accept. The heart of why princely and republican systems differ lies in how they tackle what political nerds now call the principal-agent problem. How do you get leaders to prioritize what's best for the public instead of just pursuing personal gains when they're in the driver's seat? Monarchies approach this by linking a ruler's success with their subjects' well-being, mess up the economy, wage unnecessary wars, or let chaos rule, and a prince risks getting replaced by someone more capable. This ties the ruler's goals with the public's needs without requiring any saint-like intentions. But it also places a heavy burden on the leader's mindset, with no easy ways to correct poor decisions or inept leadership. Republics, meanwhile, tackle this problem through a mix of competition and shared oversight, with different officials keeping tabs on each other and elections offering the public a chance to shuffle leadership without resorting to revolt. This structure minimizes the damage from personal mistakes or dodgy dealings, pushing leaders to stay aligned with the people's desires. Here's the thing: making sure a government can take decisive steps is tough when special interest groups step in, thanks to their careful planning and resources. For Republican setups to function smoothly, citizens need to be informed, financially stable, and actively participating in civic activities to keep a close eye on those in charge. But things can go off the rails when disparities become too big, outside pressures demand quick decisions, or internal bickering makes compromises seem impossible. Machiavelli gives it to us straight, saying that choosing between a princely or republican way of ruling should be based on what's happening now, not on idealistic dreams. New countries shaking off colonial rule, regions trying to recover from wars, or those facing major threats might need a strong leader to get things back on track with stability and security. On the other hand, societies that are already stable with educated folks, mixed economies, and settled conditions might do better with a republican system that can tackle tough problems and build agreement. The downside: leaders who've been successful often don't want to switch to a republican style, even if it's the wise choice as situations change. At the same time, republics can struggle to provide strong leadership during genuine crises. So, there's this ongoing swing between autocratic and republican styles, driven by outside pressures and internal progress. There's a big philosophical tug-of-war between having a strong leader and prioritizing public discussion. The princely view says people generally stay self-serving and checked out no matter the government type, so having standout leaders is key for any major political achievements. Meanwhile, the discussion side believes the right systems can encourage civic responsibility and spread political engagement. This allows for collective wisdom and shared leadership when conditions allow. Modern democratic theories are still grappling with this tension, balancing strong leadership with public participation, efficiency with representation, and expertise with accountability. Machiavelli provides a way to think about these compromises, reminding us there's no one rule fits all. The goal isn't to cling to princely or republican ways forever, but to understand when each works best and how societies can adapt as their circumstances shift. Part 6. War as the Ultimate Political Art. Machiavelli didn't see war as merely a battlefield endeavor. He viewed it as an essential element of politics. To him, the ability to handle war effectively was the ultimate political skill, since a government's main role is safeguarding its land from both internal and external threats. This perspective prompted a thorough examination of military organization, like citizen armies versus mercenary forces, and how the use of force molds and sustains political structures. His ideas have left a mark, from the time of Napoleon right up to present-day approaches to insurgencies. Perhaps his most profound insight was on how a nation's preparations for war impact its political culture, and how various forms of military power shape different types of governance. At the heart of Machiavelli's military musings is the belief that states can't endure without robust armed forces, yet those same forces can jeopardize governmental stability and control over civilians. This presents what you might call the military dilemma within political order. If a nation's military isn't strong enough, it risks invasion from outside or a revolt from within. On the other hand, if the military becomes too strong, it might overthrow the government or impose its will on civilian leadership. How a country manages this delicate balance leads to diverse political systems, each with its own set of advantages and pitfalls. Therefore, understanding these trade-offs is crucial to establishing enduring political frameworks and evaluating current governmental performance. Machiavelli highlighted 3 primary strategies for assembling military forces, each with unique political repercussions and practical outcomes. First, there are mercenaries, soldiers hired not out of loyalty, but for pay. This reduces the likelihood of a takeover, since mercenaries have no political ties to the land they fight for and can be dismissed when their work is done. However, relying on mercenaries is expensive and fraught with other dangers. Their allegiance can waver, especially if an enemy offers more money, and they might prolong conflicts to boost earnings. In extreme cases, they could even switch sides if victory seems unlikely. The second approach involves auxiliary forces, which are troops borrowed from friendly states or powerful local groups. This method can be more economical and might provide specialized military capabilities not easily developed independently. But it also means depending on others who might abandon the effort at crucial moments or sway internal decisions. These forces ultimately pursue their own interests rather than those of the nation they temporarily defend. Local factions loyal to influential elites pose similar problems. Their fidelity lies with their own clan rather than the central government. Both of these setups risk undermining a nation's political independence, a vulnerability that shrewd adversaries can exploit. Finally, Leaders can build their own forces with citizens as soldiers, those willing to fight to protect their lives and communities. This option carries strong motivation since they're defending what is theirs. Citizen armies are less expensive than mercenary hires and are harder to sway with cash. However, there's a catch. Citizen soldiers might become threats to internal order, armed with both military experience and vested interests in political matters. They could use their military skills to object to unpopular rules, support political opponents, or demand more influence in governance. Managing citizen armies requires a different political acumen than handling mercenaries or hired troops, leading to ongoing tensions between military effectiveness and civilian governance. The interplay between military organization and the political culture it develops is likely Machiavelli's central military insight. Societies that rely heavily on hired fighters often cultivate passive, economically focused political climates where citizens attend to their personal financial matters, leaving political decisions to professionals. While this can lead to prosperity and stability in peaceful times, it renders them vulnerable during military crises when swift action is necessary. In places where the military is made up of everyday folks, there's usually a vibrant political scene. People take interest in critical issues and feel a personal duty to defend their community. While this makes a country more resilient during military crises, it can also stir up internal conflicts and delay quick decision-making. Choosing between professional and citizen armies involves a deeper discussion about valuing individual freedoms versus ensuring collective security, a debate that continues to shape military tactics and civic roles today. Machiavelli's insights into the art of war highlight how shifts in technology can influence political setups, opening new strategic doors while posing fresh dangers. The introduction of gunpowder and artillery in the late 1400s turned the tables between attacking and defending forces. Massive walls and strongholds, once seen as symbols of strength, quickly became easy targets for cannon fire. This technological leap forced people to rethink how fortresses were built, shift siege techniques, and prioritize flexible military units over static defenses. But it wasn't just about military tactics. Societies that jumped on new tech usually left their more traditional counterparts in the dust. Leaders who understood these technological impacts on warfare could leverage these changes to boost their influence. On the other hand, nations stuck in old ways often succumb to more adaptable adversaries, no matter how strong they were otherwise. This means countries constantly need to keep a watchful eye on technological progress in the military to update their strategies as necessary. Nowadays, we see this with nuclear weapons shaping international diplomacy, the role of cyber warfare in modern conflicts, and the potential impact of artificial intelligence on future military confrontations. Part 7. Using Religion in Politics, the Influence of the Sacred on Government. Machiavelli really shook things up with his thoughts on religion, which is perhaps one of the most fascinating parts of his political ideas. He dug deep into how spiritual beliefs blend with politics, paving the way for our current thinking on civil religion, power of ideology, and cultural legitimacy. While medieval thinkers thought of religion as an unchanging source of moral guidance for politics, Machiavelli saw it more as an instrument, something that political leaders could use effectively or poorly, depending on the situation. This idea was shocking to religious folks back in his day and still stirs up debate about whether Machiavelli was secretly skeptical about religion, an ordinary believer, or something else altogether. Despite the controversy, his insights into how religion and political power interact seemed ahead of their time and still influence today's discussions about what makes a government legitimate and how society stays unified. What Machiavelli suggested was that for a political system to really thrive, it needs a shared belief system that drives people to prioritize the community's needs over their own personal wants. Just relying on logic for political decisions doesn't inspire the commitment necessary for the sacrifices required for effective governance. People need to believe that their political community is doing something bigger than just personal gain if they're going to support tough policies, pay more taxes, or risk their lives at war. Religion is key here because it ties political responsibilities to higher spiritual meanings, something that pure logic just can't do. This makes religious institutions incredibly valuable in politics, but also potentially threatening rivals, all based on how they and political leaders figure out how to work together. The tricky part is using religion's motivational power for political goals without letting religious groups become more powerful than the government. Machiavelli looked to ancient Rome as an example of how advanced political systems could merge spiritual and secular powers to boost legitimacy and keep order in society. Roman religious practices weren't about saving souls or teaching personal morals. They were all about civic functions. Ceremonies celebrated social achievements, reinforced social structures, and created a sense of unity. Religion helped strengthen authority by making it seem like political duties had the endorsement of the divine. But Roman religion also provided a way to critique and reform politics when systems got corrupt or needed fixing. It hit a balance where religion supported political stability but still allowed for change and progress. When you compare ancient Roman religion with modern Christianity, you see how different religions provide different possibilities and limits in politics. Christianity is focused on personal salvation, a comprehensive morality, and values that sometimes contradict the practical needs of politics. Its teachings of forgiveness, humility, and spiritual focus might clash with the attributes needed for strong political leadership and effective military action. Religious institutions often claim their own power to make judgments on political decisions according to their doctrines, which can lead to conflicts with political leaders. When these conflicts grow, they can paralyze the government or even start civil wars, as there's a battle over who really holds the power. But when religious and political leaders are on the same page, Christianity can be a solid foundation for political legitimacy and bring people together across different social lines. Its teachings can move people to make personal sacrifices for the common good, unifying them beyond just economic and ethnic differences. Machiavelli had some practical tips for dealing with religious institutions. Highlight their benefits while smoothing over any disputes. Politicians should show respect for religious traditions and participate in ceremonies to demonstrate their commitment to higher values and common cultural standards. This strategy can help build trust with religious communities and leverage the influence and authority of faith. However, leaders must also keep some distance, making sure that necessity guides political decisions, especially when those decisions clash with religious principles. Striking this balance requires diplomatic skill and sensitivity to religious sentiments, as visible disagreements could negatively impact both religion and politics. The goal is to encourage cooperative relationships where religious and political entities can operate effectively without encroaching on each other's domains. Machiavelli's deeper insights pose significant questions about the relationship between truth and practicality in governance. If religions primarily serve political objectives, what implications does that have on their assertions about truth and morality? If political leaders use religious imagery as a tactic, will these symbols continue to inspire genuine devotion and ethical conduct? And if people start to see their faith as a political tool, will it maintain its power to drive collective actions? These thoughts anticipate modern debates about ideology, propaganda, and the role of shared narratives in unifying societies. They also relate to current discussions about civil religion and political rituals, examining how secular societies seek motivation akin to that traditionally provided by religions. Machiavelli's ideas suggest that a shared belief system is vital for maintaining order in society, but they also highlight the tension between treating sacred concepts as mere instruments or valuing them intrinsically, presenting ongoing dilemmas for leaders trying to navigate the fine line between calculated manipulation and idealistic sincerity when engaging with religious bodies and beliefs. Part 8. Let's chat about Machiavelli and his ideas on how governments evolve over time. He cooked up this cool theory about political cycles that explains how systems grow, hit bumps, and eventually morph into something else. Now, this isn't just some dry, old-school thought. It's actually inspired by ancient thinkers like Polybius, but with Machiavelli's real-world insights and a sharp grasp on human behavior thrown in. Machiavelli points out that no government can stay the same forever. They go through changes due to internal squabbles that pop up over time. Each kind of government sets up certain perks and limits, which in turn affect how people behave. Over time, these behaviors start to shift the very things that make the government tick. Eventually, a gap forms between what the government expects and what people actually do. When this gap gets too big, the system either has to change and fix itself or get totally overhauled. In fact, this whole cycle can be kind of predictable if you know what to keep an eye on, which means you could maybe see political changes coming and design systems that are better prepared for these shifts. But here's the catch. The same social and psychological forces nudging change forward make it tough for those in charge to spot these shifts and act before it's too late. Machiavelli outlined this classic cycle beginning with a monarchy. A strong leader brings some order out of chaos. As time goes on and things settle down, there's less need for hardcore leadership. The new leaders, who inherit instead of earning their spot, often don't have the chops their predecessors did. As society thrives, people get less keen on unchecked power and want more of a say in how they're governed. This change slowly turns a monarchy into a tyranny, sparking dissatisfaction and paving the way for potential revolution. Once that tyranny crumbles, it's often swapped out for an aristocracy. In this setup, a select few, whether wealthy or wise, take charge. This can be a good thing if these elite individuals use their perks for the greater good, drawing on their education and foresight to make complex decisions without bending to short-term public demands. But success here breeds its own headaches. Over time, the ruling elite can become complacent and self-serving instead of leading effectively. New wealth and talent start cropping up, challenging the old guard's dominance. When certain groups feel left out, resentment builds against the privileges the aristocracy enjoys, pushing for a more inclusive political arrangement. As the once noble aristocracy turns into a self-serving clique, it creates a launching pad for a democratic revolution, often led by popular figures promising to hand power back to the people. For a democracy to really work, citizens need to be educated, economically stable, and have a sense of civic duty to engage in politics meaningfully. Democracy draws on the collective wisdom of the people better than any other setup, prodding leaders to stay responsive to public needs. It also provides peaceful ways to resolve disputes and adapt to changes without veering into violence. But as democracies become successful, they start eroding the very social conditions that make them thrive. Wealth leads to growth, shifting people's focus to personal gain, making them less likely to participate in civic activities. Political success also attracts opportunists who misuse the democratic system to grab power without really caring about democratic values. Plus, economic divides stir up conflicts among different groups that democracy struggles to peacefully settle. When democracy starts slipping into chaos or mob rule, people may become open to embracing authoritarianism again, craving stability and security. This completes the cycle and brings society back to square one, albeit at a new stage of development with fresh quirks. Outside influences like conquest or natural disasters can throw a wrench into this cycle, as can innovative institutions that counteract particular shortcomings of existing systems. Nevertheless, the underlying social and psychological forces driving these cycles can't be entirely eliminated just by tinkering with institutions. Political systems need to keep changing and tweaking themselves to remain efficient. No matter how good a system appears, it'll run into hurdles that require major shifts sooner or later. Understanding these phases gives us practical knowledge, not just historical guesses, to help design modern constitutions and revamp political structures. By recognizing these patterns, leaders can predict possible problems and tweak institutions well before things get dire. It also gives citizens a better grip on what to realistically expect from their political setups, steering clear of starry-eyed optimism or doom and gloom about how societies progress or falter. Right now, democratic nations are feeling the squeeze of similar repeating pressures, like dwindling public involvement, widening wealth gaps, and the allure of charismatic leaders. Machiavelli's thoughts provide a lens to see these problems clearly and figure out solutions that address their roots, not just their superficial symptoms. Part 9. Machiavelli had this intriguing take on political bickering that flips the usual thinking on its head. Instead of seeing internal conflicts as a sign of a broken system, he believed they could actually make governments stronger. Back in the old days, people figured that if everyone was clashing, everything was just falling apart, right? So, they tried creating systems where people would just get along. But Machiavelli, being the clever guy he was, saw it another way. He figured some conflicts actually helped keep things moving smoothly. They stopped power from piling up in one place, sparked new ideas, and got everyone from different communities involved. Machiavelli was really thinking ahead for his time, highlighting ideas that are now key in how democracies work, like keeping government powers in check, representing different voices and interests, and having healthy competition in politics. He wasn't just talking about the setup of the system, though. He dove into the psychological and social layers of these conflicts, figuring out when they were beneficial and when they turned problematic. Getting a handle on this is crucial today for keeping democracies thriving and navigating the usual bumps in the political road. He noticed societies tend to split naturally into groups with their own goals, beliefs, and lifestyles. You can't just design or educate away these differences because they're rooted in genuine things like social status, financial situations, and cultural backgrounds. Trying to erase or ignore these differences generally ends up with one group dominating rather than any real harmony. The sidelined folks won't be happy, which often stirs up unrest or rebellion. To handle this, political systems need to acknowledge these divisions and let groups chase their interests without it turning ugly. You need well-designed governments that protect minority rights without stopping the majority from making decisions, offering a bunch of ways for people to get involved in politics, all while keeping things chugging along smoothly. To really get what Machiavelli was talking about, look at his example of the patricians and plebeians in the Roman Republic. History books typically painted their clashes as bad news for Rome, even saying they led to the fall of the Roman government. But Machiavelli was of the mind that these clashes actually kept Rome strong. If the patricians tried to hoard all the power, the plebeians would push back, making sure they appealed to a wider audience. And if the plebeians pushed too hard, the patricians would remind them that changes need to be well planned, not rushed. This back and forth kept either side from getting too dominant and helped Rome adjust its systems over time. For conflict to be helpful and not just a big mess, certain stuff needs to be in place. First, both sides should have enough shared values and interests so that, even if things get heated, they still feel they're on the same team. If groups see their rivals as enemies or think they have no right to be in the political arena, it's no longer about competition. It becomes a fight to the finish. Second, the system has to give every significant group a real shot at influencing political outcomes without having to break the rules to do so. If people feel permanently shut out, they're going to look for other, maybe less legal, ways to make themselves heard. So here's the bottom line. Politics has to stay in a lane where losing an election or a policy vote doesn't threaten a group's very existence or identity. If political outcomes start deciding whether a group can survive, then it turns into a do-or-die situation where cooperation goes out the window. To keep things productive, the systems managing conflicts need to be thoughtfully designed, balancing the need for representation, getting stuff done, and maintaining stability. We need to have different political avenues so that various groups can champion their causes beyond simply playing the election game. Think about independent courts, federalism that spreads out power, different government agencies, or even methods like direct democracy. These ways provide a platform for minority voices, ensuring they don't have to lean entirely on the majority to be heard. It's important, though, that all these pathways work in harmony. If not, the whole system could slow down, and necessary changes might get bogged down. Striking a balance between safeguarding minority rights and being able to take swift action, particularly in emergencies or when a policy has widespread support, is key. This balance needs regular adjustments to the Constitution as society and group interactions shift. If things get heated and break into factions, the risk to democratic setups becomes massive, so leaders and citizens must keep their eyes open. Machiavelli identified several red flags signaling when politics might be spiraling into factional disorder. It begins when groups see their political opponents not just as competitors, but as adversaries. The conversation shifts from healthy policy debates to personal character attacks. Institutions start being weaponized to gain a competitive edge instead of serving as impartial venues for solving problems. If violence or its threats start creeping into political dealings, or if groups attempt to manipulate constitutional rules to ensure perpetual control, it's a major warning sign. Globally, what Machiavelli pointed out still resonates today. We see rising political divisions, a drop in trust towards institutions, and more folks resorting to methods outside constitutional frameworks. These are the factional threats he sounded the alarm on. Addressing these issues requires more than just urging people to play nice or trying to mend divisions between parties. It takes a deep dive into the social and economic conditions that enable constructive conflict, such as fair economies, universal education, and mechanisms that let all key groups have real influence on political decisions. Plus, it needs leaders who can handle differences in ways that bolster rather than bust the system. The goal isn't to eliminate conflict. It's a fundamental part of democracy, but to create a setting where conflict helps to fortify, not unravel, democratic institutions. Part 10. The Paradox of Innovation and the Problem of Founding. Machiavelli tackles a tough question in politics. How do you design new systems or modify old ones when any shakeup might create chaos? His thinking is that even when changes seem beneficial, they often hit resistance just because change can make people uneasy. It's a strange situation where the places that really need a revamp struggle to do it, while those that don't might decide to stand still even if improvements are necessary. Understanding this tricky puzzle is crucial for anyone setting out to make political changes, whether they're dealing with governments, big corporations, or social movements. Machiavelli's sharp psychological and strategic observations often pop up in modern discussions about shaking up organizations, launching revolutions, or building things from the ground up. His insights also highlight the tough realities and the heavy price that come with trying to drive political change, no matter how noble the intentions might be. At the core of this issue is Machiavelli's idea that humans tend to cling to what they know. Even when life isn't perfect, most people would rather stick with the familiar than leap into the unknown. This mindset is reflected in how people think and act, making change a really tough goal. People often have an emotional connection to systems they know well. These systems might offer them a feeling of security and a sense of identity, even when they're flawed. Any attempt to change them can make people anxious about possibly losing what they have, despite the possible benefits. On a practical level, existing systems often mean some folks have a lot riding on things staying the same, since they profit from the current setup. They'll resist any changes that might threaten their advantages. This leads to a mix of emotional and practical resistance that forms tough barriers against change, even when on paper it seems like a no-brainer. Meanwhile, people who might do well from the new changes often don't get too enthusiastic about it. They're unsure about the outcomes and don't really dive in wholeheartedly. It's just simpler for people to spot the flaws in what they live with daily than to imagine the benefits new changes might bring. Reality has a stronger impact than hypothetical scenarios. This gap between firm opposition and vague support creates a big hurdle for people trying to push through changes. They have to contend with strong resistance while leaning on shaky support. It gets more complicated when changes take time to unfold. Costs can show up right away, but the benefits might be far off and uncertain. Groups rallying for change might start losing their passion over time, while those against the change keep opposing strongly. To tackle these barriers to change, change makers need to cleverly handle both the emotional and practical resistance they encounter. Successful leaders either confront opposition directly or make their changes seem less intimidating and more appealing to key stakeholders. Going head-on means having enough force to drive changes through, but can tempt current leaders to misuse their power or veer off course. The softer approach involves forming alliances and managing the message to calm down opponents and build momentum. But this usually requires compromises, which can dilute the potential new changes. Both paths demand exceptional leadership skills and a bit of good fortune, especially when such qualities are in short supply. This explains why major political overhauls don't happen all that often, and why reform efforts often stumble or bring about unforeseen problems without solving the issues they set out to tackle. As Machiavelli noted, if you study successful political founders, you'll notice certain patterns that might offer insights for modern reform. These patterns also point out the difficult and sometimes ethically murky situations that accompany significant changes. These successful founders typically emerge during crisis periods, when existing systems clearly aren't cutting it, making people more open to change and the risks that accompany it. In such times, you'll find that the door is open for reform because opposition weakens, and folks are more willing to try out new ideas. However, this urgency can lead to hasty decisions with little room for thorough planning and discussion. Moreover, these founders often have unique personal qualities that help them stay focused and push through significant obstacles. However, such qualities frequently include a level of ambition that might not sit well in a democratic setting once new systems become operational. Additionally, getting a fresh system off the ground usually involves a mix of persuasion and force, with the balance between the two significantly impacting whether the new institutions are seen as legitimate and enduring. Navigating political innovation involves moral conflicts that create ongoing dilemmas for anyone seeking to balance effective reform with ethical integrity. Big changes may require stepping outside existing rules and procedures that have become obstacles to progress. Yet, frequently disregarding legal boundaries weakens the rule of law and sets a precedent for future opportunists. Effective reform might also necessitate concentrating power in ways that skirt normal democratic checks, but this can lead to abuses and set patterns of authoritarian behavior that persist well beyond the intended reforms. These perplexing issues can't be resolved through theoretical moral philosophy alone, as they involve real clashes between essential values that don't always align nicely. Machiavelli's insights suggest that reformers need to confront these moral costs directly, managing them thoughtfully rather than pretending sweeping change can happen without any negative consequences. This doesn't ask for moral purity or rigid ideology, but instead calls for a morally serious approach and practical wisdom, tricky qualities to maintain in the chaotic world of big political shifts. Reflecting on Machiavelli's thoughts is especially pertinent today when examining the problems facing democratic systems, international organizations, and social movements globally. Issues like climate change, rapid technological progress, and global economic changes demand fresh institutional thinking that challenges entrenched norms and practices. Understanding how resistance operates and what it takes to achieve change can help today's reformers devise more grounded strategies and avoid past missteps. Nevertheless, Machiavelli also warns that some challenges might be too vast or complex for current political frameworks, signaling a need for more profound shifts that contemporary democratic setups might not manage. This creates an ongoing tension between democratic principles and practical effectiveness, necessitating persistent attention and inventive solutions for our institutions. The goal isn't to abandon democratic ideals. Instead, it's about finding ways to expand them to address issues their founders couldn't have predicted. Part 11. Machiavelli long ago figured out that political power mainly comes down to having money, but he didn't just leave it at money talks. He looked into how different ways of taxing, spending, and distributing wealth can shape political systems, each with its own set of pros and cons. This thinking hinted at what we now call political economy and managing public funds. His view was special, though, because rather than pondering what's fair or efficient, he was all about what actually keeps power stable. Understanding these money matters is crucial for anyone aiming to run a tight ship, whether in ancient times or today. Democracies all over the world still face the challenges Machiavelli highlighted, balancing the public's demands with tax pushback, figuring out the play between private wealth and political power, and ensuring there's enough dough to defend and keep the country ticking. Machiavelli started with the simple truth that governments need a steady flow of cash to operate smoothly. The trick is, every way to fill the treasury comes with drawbacks, possibly risking the government's credibility and stability. Taxes move money from personal to public hands, but can tick off taxpayers and stifle economic motivation. Borrowing might help short-term, but can put governments on the hook with lender expectations. Confiscating assets brings instant money but erodes trust and can drive resources out of the country, hurting the economy in the long haul. Even conquests can boost the treasury but are expensive due to the upkeep of armies. Each method of keeping the government funded involves some trade-off now or later, requiring smart, strategic planning. Machiavelli's take on how taxes tie into maintaining political legitimacy showcases some of his most insightful ideas. Governments that mainly tax their people have to keep them on board. If folks aren't happy with a policy, they'll resist. This pressures leaders to tune in to the citizens, but it can slow things down when quick money moves are needed for national security. Governments reliant on external cash, like tribute or loans, don't fret as much about public opinion at home, but must manage those foreign revenue streams to avoid entanglements that could disconnect them from domestic affairs. Striking the optimal balance between domestic and foreign funds is context-specific. Understanding these trade-offs explains why different governments stick to certain financial strategies and their outcomes. Today, you can see how oil-rich nations often lean toward authoritarianism, or how foreign aid impacts democracy, and how global financial markets shape local policies. Machiavelli's insights into wealth distribution echo in today's debates on economic policies and political stability. When the wealth gap widens too much, it stirs political unrest as the needy become more vocal and the wealthy get anxious, creating conditions ripe for conflict. Attempts to redistribute wealth through government programs bring their own political challenges. These efforts require significant government involvement and can dampen incentives for people to work harder. The key takeaway here is that for a political system to last, it must find a way to keep inequality from becoming so intense that it tears at the social fabric and erodes trust in government. Back in aristocratic days, they managed this by pushing the wealthy to care for those beneath them, providing protection and aid. Nowadays, democracies tackle this with tools like progressive taxes and welfare programs that distribute resources through government channels. However, both systems run into issues due to economic changes that create new inequalities and divide societies in various ways. Machiavelli tells us there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the ongoing clash between being economically savvy and politically steady. Societies that thrive keep their economies on their toes, always ready to deal with fresh challenges. One tricky aspect that's haunted democracies for ages is the link between private wealth and political clout, something Machiavelli noted way before capitalism became a household name. Rich folks and entities can heavily influence political results by splashing cash in elections, lobbying, and applying various financial pressures. This financial muscle often skews democracy, tilting it away from the people's needs. But trying to keep big bucks in check in politics often flops because money has a way of zigzagging through regulatory obstacles. Moreover, the savvy skills that make someone excel in business are often the same ones useful in leadership, so kicking wealthy individuals out of politics might mean letting some great leaders slip through the cracks. Machiavelli argues that instead of aiming to completely squash the influence of money, probably a pipe dream, the goal should be to steer it so that it serves the public good instead of just padding private pockets. This means crafting systems where private and public interests overlap nicely and ensuring less affluent groups have a fair shot at political influence when necessary. Modern strategies include campaign finance rules, demanding transparency from lobbyists, and using public funding to level the political playing field. Take a look at national defense as an example. When countries sense threats, it directly affects how they handle cash and resources. Staying defended requires heavy spending on personnel, gear, and infrastructure, often conflicting with other state priorities and personal spending habits. Nations at risk have to be nimble, ready to shuffle funds quickly if a threat pops up. Yet, keeping defense systems primed during peacetime can stir political tensions. People naturally prefer to spend on immediate needs rather than prepping for maybe wars, yet being unprepared militarily could lead to being overrun, erasing all a nation's past successes. This creates a tough balancing act in political economy, because shelling out for military readiness is a current hit, while its benefits become obvious only in times of conflict. Machiavelli suggests that prosperous nations need to keep their military edge sharp without letting defense costs stifle their economic growth and social welfare. This demands clever planning and public education to understand how securing the nation is linked to long-term prosperity. Military forces need to follow civilian leader directives and shouldn't hog more resources than necessary for real safety needs. Part 12. Talking about international relations, Machiavelli was ahead of his time, setting the stage for how countries interact today. His insights, though centuries old, still play a vital role in shaping global policies, international laws, and military strategies. Even just like his views on running a country, Machiavelli focused on understanding what really works on the global scene. But internationally, things are more complicated because different countries are involved. Unlike domestic politics that operate within a framework of laws, the global stage is more like an open battlefield. There's no one entity enforcing rules or keeping nations in check, leading to what's known as an anarchic system, where every nation must look out for itself to thrive. Navigating this chaotic global landscape requires different skills than governing at home, although having a grasp of human nature and power dynamics remains crucial. Machiavelli's thoughts on diplomacy serve as a surprisingly relevant guide for managing today's international relations. At the core of his philosophy is the realization that power and interest outweigh ethical principles and promises in global interactions. Countries may sign treaties and declare adherence to international norms, but they'll often break these commitments if it means gaining an advantage, and they're confident they won't get caught. This doesn't mean that treaties are useless or that moral considerations never play a role. It means that diplomacy should be based on realistic expectations of what countries are likely to do rather than what they should ideally do. Sharp diplomats understand that nations act out of self-interest and strategize accordingly, instead of assuming they'll forego personal gain for the sake of global harmony or fairness. This realistic approach leads to better predictions of other nations' actions and more effective means of reaching international objectives. Alliances exemplify these complexities in global politics. They can boost national security by combining resources and presenting a unified stance. However, they can also trap nations, pulling them into conflicts they'd rather avoid or instilling a false sense of security if allies prove unreliable. Machiavelli advises that forming alliances shouldn't be done blindly just because collaboration seems beneficial. Instead, nations need to carefully assess the benefits and drawbacks of each partnership. They should balance the security and flexibility alliances offer against the risks of being tied to others, aiming to stay adaptable as global power dynamics and threats evolve. This is evident today with shifts in NATO's role, changing Middle Eastern alliances, and new partnerships in the Asia-Pacific region. One of Machiavelli's essential points was the link between military power and diplomatic success. Imagine this: if one country is in negotiations, the impact it has a lot to do with its military muscle. A nation with a weak military might face limitations despite having skilled diplomats and fair goals, often finding its proposals dismissed by others who then pursue their own interests. Conversely, countries with significant military strength often get their way by merely implying force, no actual fighting necessary. This is the diplomatic utility of military power, where the potential use of force can resolve issues without actual warfare. But deploying this power successfully isn't straightforward. It's not just about having weapons. It's about being willing to use them when needed. A country that talks big but doesn't act might find its influence doesn't match its weaponry. Meanwhile, a nation that demonstrates it, will use its might thoughtfully, can achieve diplomatic victories that might otherwise seem impossible. Here's a twist for you. When it comes to global politics, getting countries to sign on the dotted line and actually work together is way harder than doing so within one country. National laws can enforce agreements internally, but internationally, countries only keep promises if they want to. This makes everyone cautious because anyone might back out if it suits them better. Game theorists call this issue the cooperation problem. Everyone benefits from working together, but trust is a major stumbling block. Remember Machiavelli? Well, he had some smart ideas about fixing these trust issues. His suggestion was to craft agreements that rewarded everyone for staying committed over time, rather than just pushing through for immediate gain at a potential future cost. It's also smart to set up systems that monitor these commitments and make backing out a tough decision. When you tie agreements to broader, lasting relationships, breaking one can lead to bigger problems later on. Then there's the aspect of reputation and trustworthiness in the international arena. Countries with a solid track record of keeping their promises find it easier to land favorable agreements because others expect them to deliver. On the flip side, if a country gets known for going back on its word, others will either want guarantees up front or steer clear. So, nations have to weigh the urge to break promises in the short term against the potential long-term hit to their reputation, which affects both individual relations and their broader global status. Look at today's scene. When trade deals get broken, it messes up future negotiations. Human rights violations can tarnish a country's image worldwide, and choices over nuclear arms can affect security partnerships. Keeping reputation in check can explain why some nations stick to their promises, even if it seems better not to at first glance. Their diplomatic efforts often ripple out beyond just the immediate issues at hand. Part 13. When you're stepping into the political scene, making enemies and facing rivals is kind of part of the job description. These rivals might resort to scheming and violence if traditional political strategies don't get them to their goal. Machiavelli had some sharp insights about these elite power struggles. He breaks down why folks get involved in conspiracies and offers advice for leaders on how to protect themselves from these sorts of internal dangers. Even today, his observations ring true, whether we're talking about military coups, corporate backstabbing, or terrorist activities. He doesn't just stick to tactics, though. He digs into the links between political trust and power, as well as the psychology that holds political authority together. If you're leading anything, getting a grip on these dynamics is crucial. You're playing in a world where cooperation, competition, loyalty, and ambition get all mixed up, often within the same group of people. What Machiavelli had to say about conspiracies applies beyond just governments. His insights are relevant in places like businesses, military organizations, universities, and social movements, where similar rivalries and potential for betrayal can happen. The heart of his analysis on conspiracies revolves around the idea that any political arena is teeming with ambitious folks who believe they could do a better job than the current leaders. These people might resort to underhanded tactics if they think the usual pathways won't take them where they want to go. They're not necessarily villains, just individuals whose personal goals don't line up with the present power structure. This conflict isn't because the system is flawed, it's just a reality of navigating our complex world. Leaders who excel are those who can guide these rivalries in constructive directions, keeping them from escalating into full-blown conspiracies and violence. To do this, leaders must understand the motivations driving people to conspire and recognize what societal conditions make these plots more likely. Ambitious folks need paths to advance in their careers and influence policy without having to revolt. Leaders who understand the mindset of potential schemers will spot patterns and act before things spiral out of control. These plotters often feel overlooked for accolades or promotions they think they've earned. This sense of unfairness can grow from a specific grievance into a larger challenge against the leadership. Additionally, would-be conspirators frequently convince themselves that their actions would benefit the public, not just their own ambitions. This belief makes plotting seem like a noble cause, not just a power grab which lowers their limits to taking risky actions. On top of that, they often underestimate the difficulty of executing a successful conspiracy and overestimate the support they'd have if they succeed. This mix of self-justification and overconfidence creates a psychological pattern that leaders can recognize and counter with the right blend of compromise and firm deterrence. Instead of trying to squash ambition, the goal should be to direct it toward positive outcomes. Conspiracies form when personal ambitions align with social conditions ripe for organized opposition against those in charge. For a conspiracy to really succeed, you need a group of people ready to risk a lot, their lives and resources, for potentially uncertain rewards. It's easier to gather people when they feel that the current systems aren't working, or when the promised rewards make the risk of failure worth taking. Things like economic swings, losing battles, or leaders involved in corruption can set the scene for conspiracies because they lower the perceived risks of challenging the norm and make success more appealing. In contrast, in places where trust is high, where there are effective ways to handle power disputes, and where power changes smoothly, major conspiracies are less common. That's because people have legitimate ways to advance without causing trouble. If leaders can identify what makes conspiracies more likely, they can address the root causes instead of scrambling to fix problems as they arise. Machiavelli, the wise old counselor, once said that to ward off conspiracies, leaders need to skillfully manage their systems, keep their ear to the ground, and understand how folks are thinking. This advice still holds water in today's security game. Those in charge should set up multiple ways to gather info on what the power players are planning to nip any threats in the bud. However, there's a tricky balance to strike, keeping people safe without turning into Big Brother and freaking everyone out with too much surveillance. It's also crucial to have a strong defensive crew on standby to scare off potential plotters, but these forces must be kept in check so they don't become a threat themselves. Shaping political spaces where ambitious people can climb the ladder without causing chaos is key. This might mean switching leaders regularly, promoting folks based on merit, and allowing potential rivals a say in decision-making to keep them from staging a coup. The goal is to make collaboration more enticing than sneaky schemes. Managing the mess that follows any plotting, whether successful or not, requires a delicate touch to avoid feuding that could disturb political stability and undermine structures. Leaders who have weathered conspiracy attempts might become overly cautious and controlling, potentially pushing away loyal supporters and inviting new plots. But coming down too harshly on plotters can turn them into heroes for others, stirring more dissent. However, going too easy could appear weak and invite further challenges. It's all about finding the sweet spot, which takes sharp political instincts and tough decisions about punishing plotters to set an example for the future. Some modern tactics aim for peace, like truth and reconciliation processes, offering redemption paths for rebels, and creating power-sharing agreements to encourage former enemies to team up in politics. Understanding these strategies helps explain why some political systems stay smooth and prosperous, while others get stuck in a cycle of betrayal, oppression, and retaliatory moves that stifle growth and progress. The goal isn't to eliminate political rivalry. It's impossible and, frankly, unnecessary. Instead, we need to ensure that this competition strengthens the political structure rather than tearing it apart. Part 15. Machiavelli doesn't see laws as just eternal moral guides or simple tools used by those in power. Instead, he looks at how laws interact with the political environment to create stability and foster trust, which helps governments work effectively. His insights continue to stir debates in the realm of constitutional law and in global discussions on legal systems in developing countries, reminding us that good governance is about more than just drafting nice-sounding laws and crossing fingers. For people involved in updating legal systems, drafting constitutions, or building institutions, especially in places where official laws clash with other power structures and legitimacy sources, Machiavelli's ideas are crucial. They also play a part in modern conversations about international laws, corporate guidelines, and regulatory policies, where it's key to find a balance between strict legal procedures and their real-world effects. Machiavelli believed that the strength of legal institutions isn't really based on their moral goodness or logical clarity. Instead, it's about how well they mesh with power balances and what people generally agree on. Laws that go against powerful interests are often ignored, while those that align with power dynamics are usually followed, even if they might be morally iffy. So, for successful legal reform, the focus needs to be on the political and social climates that make obeying laws appealing and beneficial, rather than just making fancy-sounding laws that don't influence behavior by themselves. Laws work best when they align with behaviors people are already inclined to follow for their own reasons, rather than when they try to enforce whole new behaviors that don't match current motivations. This helps explain why legal systems often struggle when applied to societies not suited to their original context, and why having equal laws doesn't always mean real equality if there are deep economic or social gaps. Machiavelli also throws light on the interaction between legal and non-legal power sources. No matter how top-notch a legal system is, it can't cover every situation a leader might face, meaning they might have to step outside legal bounds in critical moments. But leaders who rely too much on such powers risk undermining the credibility and effectiveness of the legal systems that offer stability in normal times. The real challenge is figuring out when stepping beyond legal lines is genuinely needed and ensuring that these actions reinforce, rather than weaken, the legal framework over time. This balancing act is a tough call for democratic countries, especially when dealing with national security threats, economic slumps, or health crises. Let's break this down into simpler terms. Let's think about things like executive powers during wartime or actions a central bank might take in a financial crisis. There are also times when government agencies need to tweak the rules to deal with unique situations. The goal isn't to get rid of all forms of extra-legal powers because that would mess with governance. Instead, it's about making sure these actions genuinely help the public and fit well with systems of accountability and checks and balances. Now, about what the legal system actually does. It's not just for settling disputes and handing out punishments. It goes way beyond that. Legal systems help maintain social order, legitimize actions, and manage societal power dynamics. They provide predictable methods to resolve conflicts that might otherwise spiral into chaos. They lay down the groundwork for how we see our rights and obligations, making it easier for people to conduct business and social interactions even without personal connections. Importantly, they provide channels for political participation, steering frustration or ambition in helpful directions instead of leaving rebellion or surrender as the only choices. These functions of the law are often more crucial for maintaining stability than the laws themselves. Legal institutions that manage to excel in this regard earn trust and influence, even if their legal rulings aren't always top-notch or consistent. On the flip side, those excelling in technicalities but missing the broader political picture might be sidelined when political pressures mount. All right? So when we dive into legal reforms, they often catch us off guard because you can't just zero in on the nitty-gritty stuff without thinking about the broader political and social setups. There's this constant balancing act going on between the nitty-gritty legal stuff and what actually works in the real world, much like the kind of thinking old Machiavelli put a spotlight on. Locking too tight onto the legal jargon can keep things steady, but it might also stifle needed changes and create loopholes that let people use laws for their own little interests, forgetting the bigger picture and public good. But if you get too laid back with the law, sure, you might gain some wiggle room, but things can become shaky and even get out of hand, wrecking trust in the system. Hitting that sweet spot where you're balancing being firm and being flexible really depends on the scenario and how solid existing institutions are, and you're always navigating between sticking to values and reaching goals. Think about the arguments over interpreting constitutions or the nitty-gritty details in administrative law. Or look at global legal frameworks that have to sync up with the diverse legal setups and cultures across different countries. Machiavelli would probably point out that these back and forths can't be solved by legal talk alone. You need a mix of political smarts to really ensure legal systems boost good government and social peace. At the end of the day, we're not about crafting perfect legal setups, because that's just not going to happen. Instead, it's more about building legal institutions that are tough enough to help political and social order, even as they stay flexible to roll with changes coming down the line. And then there's the enforcement deal. The real weight of laws hangs a lot on political and social backing. A law is basically just a nice idea without the grunt to back it up, especially if it's at odds with what people want or what society expects. But getting laws enforced takes both the right structures and the political willpower to see it through. It's like this chicken and egg situation with laws needing the right political climate, which they're also supposed to shape. The whole issue with enforcing laws gets even messier where the state's a bit on the weak side, societies are at loggerheads with legal demands, or huge swathes of folks are just plain skeptical of the legal system. For laws to work as they should, systems have to come up with enforcement that fits the times and surroundings, while also slowly beefing up institutions to make sure people stick to the laws way better over time. That might mean fiercely enforcing only the really important laws, punishing in ways that motivate folks to follow the law on their own, or rallying community power to bring law's goals into reality. This plays out today in stuff like community policing, where getting along is the name of the game rather than cracking down, and international laws that rely more on keeping reputations and mutual understanding than on forceful policing. Understanding these ways to enforce gives us a peek at why just fiddling with laws often doesn't bring about the changes you want, and why building strong institutions means a steady focus on how laws go from paper to real life, rather than just drafting new laws or meddling with constitutions. Part 16. How Opinion Influences Politics and Its Ripple Effects. The relationship between public opinion and political leadership is like a complex puzzle that's both challenging and fascinating to solve. This dynamic dives into how democracy thrives by examining the psychology behind mass opinion and what truly makes government tick. While some folks might celebrate the wisdom of the crowd, others dismiss it as sheer chaos. Machiavelli offers a perspective on the impact of public sentiment on leadership, pinpointing when it bolsters or undermines authority. This lens anticipates how media, voter behavior, and propaganda play out in politics today. It raises the question, can authentic and open governance harmonize with widespread public support? This is a conundrum democracies wrestle with even now. Understanding these connections is crucial for politicians, activists, or everyday people as they juggle being attentive to the people while trying to lead effectively in our intricate world. Machiavelli's insights into public opinion remain relevant, shaping debates about social media, political divides, and the subtle ways information gets distorted, tugging at the same psychological strings he noted ages ago. Central to this discussion is the idea that the way the public judges is unlike expert assessments or personal decisions. Large groups tend to respond more to what's happening right now and emotionally touching rather than digging deep into future predictions or dense policy details. So, political messaging needs to tap into these gut reactions, acknowledging that people aren't usually engaged in deep, reflective discussions as much as democratic ideals might wish. Public opinion can be unpredictable, flipping with sensational news, but losing interest with ongoing issues needing long-term, gradual solutions. It's more retrospective, evaluating leaders by their results rather than intentions, and boiling down complex societal shifts into simple narratives, even if they aren't entirely accurate. These patterns aren't issues to fix with education. They're part of how groups process political developments, a reality that savvy leaders need to maneuver around. The moral quandary of leadership lies between saying what people want to hear versus what they need to know for healthy self-governance. Democratic theory holds that informed citizens can make wise choices on big matters. But the Machiavellian view warns that excessive honesty might undermine the very support leaders need to function effectively. People often favor soothing, quick solutions over the tough, complex truths that honest policies demand. Leaders who deliver bare-bones reality might be sidelined by those offering swift remedies to major problems, regardless of feasibility. This pushes communication toward spotlighting the positives, glossing over the downsides, shifting blame to external factors instead of inherent challenges, and overpromising results. Such approaches might help win elections, but could also damage the informed consent essential for the legitimacy of democratic governance. The disconnect between public perception and expert knowledge highlights another significant challenge in democracy that Machiavelli helps illuminate. Crafting sound policies often demands specialized expertise too complex for everyday citizens to fully grasp. In a democratic setup, it's crucial for major policy decisions to align with the public's wishes, not just with what experts deem optimal. This can lead to friction, because sometimes the public advocates for actions experts consider ineffective, or they turn down solutions experts agree are crucial for solving big problems. Leaders, therefore, must find methods to rally public backing for policies advised by experts without appearing to ignore or manipulate public sentiment. This might include educational initiatives to help people understand technical subjects, setting up channels for genuine participation in decision-making, or creating frameworks that keep some policy areas out of direct public hands while still ensuring democratic accountability. These days, you notice how we have independent central banks, expert advisory boards, and all sorts of ways to mix expert opinions with what regular folks think. The idea isn't to tune out what the public or experts have to say, but to create a scene where both sides get to pitch in on forming policies. Smart leaders have a knack for getting the public on board with important policies, while keeping everything fair and honest. Successful political communication is about breaking down complex stuff so that what needs to happen fits with what people care about, instead of having them support things that don't make sense with their values. So, this could involve emphasizing certain policy points while playing down others, tying policy debates to shared values or experiences, or waiting for the right moment politically to introduce plans. Moreover, it's about forming strong partnerships to show broad support for certain policies, delivering positive results to build trust for future plans, or easing into controversial ideas so people have time to get used to them. All of this hinges on understanding human nature and having keen political instincts. This way, democratic leaders can do their work effectively without misleading anyone. What's key is that honest government doesn't mean laying every single detail out, but ensuring people are on board because they get the main options and trade-offs, not because they're sold on fake hopes or impossible promises. Balancing leadership with the public involves different ways of representation, listening, and holding leaders accountable, aiming to respond to public input while being effective. While direct democracy lets people make policy decisions themselves, it sometimes leads to hasty decisions rather than thoughtful ones on tricky topics. Elected officials in representative democracies serve as a cushion against impulsive public opinions, but still have to answer to the people. Though this can create a gap between what folks want and what they actually get, potentially hurting how legitimate the system feels. Alternative forms of deliberative democracy try to mix citizen involvement with structured talks to enhance decision-making, but they can be too slow or complicated for everyday choices. Choosing the right setup depends on the context and policy area, generally combining different methods so the public can influence in a variety of ways, while ensuring the democratic process results in practical policies. Examples today include citizen panels, public consultation for regulatory decisions, and participatory budgeting, where people can directly affect certain government decisions. Understanding these institutional setups helps explain why some democracies manage the leader and public relationship better than others. It shows why democratic governance needs constant adjustments rather than sticking to fixed democratic norms. The aim isn't to perfectly match public opinion with policy outcomes, since that's probably impossible in complex societies. Instead, it's about making sure democratic systems allow enough public influence to keep things legitimate, while creating policies that effectively address major social challenges. Part 17. gets into the idea of the geography of power, focusing on how territory, borders, and strategic space play into politics. Machiavelli explores how these geographical factors aren't just a backdrop, but key players in domestic and international politics, military tactics, and economic growth, issues that are still relevant today. While some might view territory just as a scene for political drama, Machiavelli sees geography as something that molds political chances, creates strengths and weaknesses, and affects whether government systems succeed or fail. His thoughts on how controlling land, managing borders, and the intersection of geography with political institutions were groundbreaking, kind of like a crystal ball for modern geopolitics, regional development ideas, and spatial economics. These ideas still matter in military strategies, global negotiations, and internal policies. Machiavelli also looked at how geography teams up with human institutions and technology, crafting strategic environments that are always evolving, needing political systems to stay flexible. Grasping these geographical details is crucial for folks in national security, regional development, or international relations, since space throws up both opportunities and hurdles that shape political outcomes. His geographical understanding carries forward into today's discussions on globalization, climate change, and tech changes, all of which are reshaping how land and political power connect and require fresh strategic thinking. Machiavelli kicks off his thoughts on territory by stressing that control over land is the backbone of political power. But just holding on to land isn't enough. It needs defending from outsiders, governing with strong institutions, and cultural and economic integration to create real political communities, not just occupied spaces. How you go about this depends on geographical facts like size, shape, landscape, climate, resources, and closeness to other nations. Smaller areas might be easier to handle and guard, but could lack resources for complete independence. Conversely, bigger areas might be resource-rich, but tougher to unify and defend. Natural elements like mountains, rivers, and coastlines provide natural borders that can aid in guarding and ruling, but may also create internal divisions, making unity a challenge. Plus, being in the right spot in relation to trade routes, resources, and nearby powers offers strategic pros and cons that affect foreign policy and internal development. One big takeaway from Machiavelli's strategic thinking is how expanding territory connects to political stability. More land can mean more resources, a buffer against threats, and a display of governmental might, increasing its status at home and abroad. But expanding also means more administrative and defense pressures, with potential drawbacks that might eclipse the perks of new land. The best territorial size for a political unit depends on how good its institutions are, the tech it has, and its strategic context, not just whether it should grow more or stay isolated. History tells us that overexpansion and extreme isolation can be risky, with the most successful cases being those that slowly expand, allowing institutions time to adapt. Today, this includes the tensions within federal systems juggling local and national interests, the challenges of establishing control in occupied areas, and the tug-of-war between economic unity and political freedom inside international setups. When you look at how different countries handle their borders, it really shows how geography and politics mix together to create both safety issues and chances for growth. These are things that leaders constantly need to keep in mind. A well-managed border should be sturdy enough to block military threats, simple to handle for government tasks, and open to positive economic and cultural interactions, while also being strict enough to prevent harmful intrusions. This balance is tough to strike, as these roles often don't fit together smoothly and call for clever organizational setups that can change with evolving situations and dangers. While natural landscapes might offer some level of protection, they don't always align with the best areas for business or government operations. On top of that, advancements in technology are continually shifting the value of geographic features, bringing in new methods for defense and attack, which then alter how borders are managed. Just think about how flying has changed the concept of traditional geographic barriers, or how cyber warfare goes over physical lines, and how climate change throws new challenges at the way borders are organized. When you consider the economic distribution of power, it highlights how geography interacts with trade, resources, and tech to either limit or enhance what nations can achieve both at home and abroad. Those who control key geographic locations like ports, mountain passes, or rivers can turn these into economic wins, while those in less advantageous spots might face big hurdles. Yet, these natural benefits can either be enhanced or reduced based on what the institutions are capable of, the tech they have, and strategic partnerships that help countries go beyond their immediate geographic limits. New developments in transport and communication are constantly revising the importance of different land features and creating chances for economic and political interaction beyond traditional borders. Consider how containerization has impacted port cities, digital technologies, enabling remote work, or the strategic value of rare earth minerals for tech progress. Understanding these changing dynamics can illuminate why some regions enjoy economic and political success, while others, despite their natural perks, don't experience the same level of prosperity. Additionally, the cultural and psychological elements of territorial identity reveal how spaces become steeped in political significance, influencing people's loyalty, national pride, and a country's global standing beyond strategic reasons. Places viewed as historic homelands, sacred sites, or crucial to national identity often receive greater emotional and political backing than areas seen merely as valuable assets or resources. These deep-rooted ties can fuel political movements and resistance, but might also hinder rational strategic planning and peaceful solutions. Areas with diverse communities, contested pasts, or weak cultural ties may require different governance models than those with more unified populations and shared identities. The challenge for leaders is to nurture enough local loyalty to ensure political unity, while avoiding the sort of territorial nationalism that could lead to unnecessary conflict with neighboring countries. Current examples like territorial disputes leading to international clashes, multicultural societies dealing with various claims, and how migration or global shifts affect traditional territorial identities highlight these challenges. Grasping the cultural layers can help clarify why territorial conflicts often remain unresolved and why effective territorial management demands attention to symbolic and psychological aspects, not just the usual administrative or military considerations. We aren't looking to eliminate people's ties to their land, because these connections are crucial for creating political identities and uniting communities. Instead, The focus is on handling these attachments wisely, so they bolster political unity and steer clear of unhealthy border disputes. Part 18. Corruption. Rather than seeing corruption just as a moral or legal failing, he discusses how the structure of a political system can actually make corrupt behavior seem appealing and beneficial to those within it. His insights on how institutions and their social environments promote corruption continue to influence how we study government efficiency, economic development, and the reinforcement of democracy today. Machiavelli points out that simply introducing new laws or teaching ethics won't easily fix corruption, since it often indicates deeper problems within the institution that need fundamental changes. Understanding these issues is vital for anyone looking to reform institutions, enhance economic growth, or fight corruption, especially in places where existing systems are controlled by particular interests or where maintaining honest governance is difficult. His ideas are still relevant as countries worldwide, regardless of wealth, face political corruption that undermines governments and weakens people's trust in democratic systems. Machiavelli's key insight into corruption lies in his distinction between two types: personal corruption, which involves specific acts of dishonesty or abuse of power, and systemic corruption, which reflects a broader decline in moral standards and rules that ordinarily curb selfish behaviors. Personal corruption can happen anywhere and might be addressed by stricter monitoring, law enforcement, and punishment for wrongdoers. However, systemic corruption is a deeper problem where corrupt actions become normal, undermining the shared sense of what behavior is acceptable. This situation makes acting honestly risky because following the rules puts one at a disadvantage against those who don't. Economists describe this as a corruption equilibrium, where everyone feels they must engage in corruption regardless of personal morals. Escaping this state requires a widespread change in institutional structures, enforcement policies, and societal expectations, far beyond simply catching individual wrongdoers. Looking at how economic inequality and political corruption intertwine shows how social conditions and institutional structures can either encourage or discourage integrity in governance. Stark economic disparities often lead the wealthy to use corruption to gain political influence. Additionally, poorly paid public officials might resort to corrupt practices to make ends meet. When such economic divides exist, the political power of middle-class groups, who typically push for clean governance and reform, can diminish. If wealthy elites find corruption more effective than democracy for achieving their goals, they'll have little incentive to support reforms aimed at making government more responsive to general public concerns. Similarly, if officials can't survive on their legal incomes, corruption might seem more an economic necessity than an ethical lapse. Therefore, tackling entrenched corruption requires considering the economic backdrop, adjusting institutional frameworks, and strengthening enforcement measures. Modern examples, like how natural resource wealth impacts governance or globalization's effect on regulation, demonstrate how economic progress supports democratic enhancement. These factors highlight why focusing solely on legal enforcement in anti-corruption efforts often isn't enough. Instead of just getting bogged down in the broader social and economic conditions that make corruption seem like the go-to option, we should really dig into how the way institutions are set up can either curb or enable it. The structure of government, has a lot to do with whether those in power are nudged toward either corruption or ethical behavior. When you hand over too much control to a select few without seriously keeping them in check, corruption tends to follow. On the other hand, a setup that spreads out power and mixes different interests naturally blocks shady behavior. But if you scatter power too much, it can turn into a mess where no one's really accountable, giving dodgy folks the gaps they need to operate unnoticed. Crafting the ideal institutional framework really rides on wider societal factors, tech influences, and cultural attitudes, because these shape how effective these frameworks are in the real world. Tools for transparency that let the public see what the government's up to can shine a light on corruption by making sneaky deals painfully obvious and politically risky. But just being open won't cut it if the public or civil organizations can't effectively scrutinize government actions, or if the media's got its own corrupt agenda. Similarly, elections with real competition can push for cleaner politics, since bad actors can be voted out. Even then, campaign pressures might push boundaries to scamper for funds, ushering in yet another stream of political corruption. On the global stage, corruption throws in extra layers of complexity that go beyond mere national fixes. With globalization, shady players find it easier to hide their money in foreign lands, utilize global banking to launder cash, or dodge legal troubles by exploiting different legal loopholes in various countries. Countries might let go of strict regulations to attract foreign investors or boost their businesses globally, which can give corruption a free pass. Multinational companies may play dirty in jurisdictions with a weaker legal system while appearing clean at home, creating a double standard that can mess up global anti-corruption strategies. Combating these global issues demands countries and international stakeholders, often with conflicting priorities, to join forces for coordinated efforts. An example includes international moves to tackle money laundering, tax evasion, and bribery, which all need intricate global collaboration and enforcement measures. The cultural and psychological dimensions show us how societal values intermingle with institutional setups, either enabling or hindering honest governance. Societies grounded in civic engagement, trust, and respect for the law generally face less corruption than those missing these qualities. Cultural norms, however, aren't unchangeable. They can evolve alongside institutional modifications and social transformations, which means that corruption can grow as it chips away at social trust and community involvement. How people view corruption is often tied more to their perceptions of fairness and government efficiency and legitimacy, rather than just a strict moral standpoint. If they feel the government only caters to the elite, corruption might seem like the status quo or even defensible. But if they believe institutions are genuinely working for the public benefit, they're more likely to support anti-corruption moves. This signals that tackling corruption means addressing political legitimacy and institutional functioning, along with pinpointing specific corrupt acts to really improve governance over the long haul. The goal isn't to completely eradicate corruption. Given the intricacies of societies, this could be a monumental aspiration. The focus should be on crafting systems where ethical behavior is rewarding, and the stakes for corrupt activities are high enough to dissuade misconduct. This means continually refining and tuning up our institutions and not just relying on anti-corruption laws to miraculously self-execute. Part 19. The Dance Between Knowledge and Power. Machiavelli tackled a huge question in politics: How does brain power mingle with political muscle? Some folks see politics as either controlled by lofty ideals or dismiss thoughtful analysis altogether when it comes to making decisions. Machiavelli, though, had a fresh perspective. He explored how smarts and strength interact in politics, sometimes paving the way for skilled leaders, but also tossing some curveballs. Machiavelli's thoughts on the usefulness of brains in politics, the limitations of pure intellect, and how thinking outside the box can empower political influence are still echoing today. His influence is clear in discussions about the role of experts in governance, specialists advising policymakers, and universities' influence on democracy. He also warned about the pitfalls of using intellect as the primary tool in political strategy, highlighting that what works in academia doesn't always translate to political success. Understanding this balance is crucial whether you're shaping policy, conducting research, or leveraging your expertise to sway political decisions in today's complex environment. Machiavelli's insights into the interplay between smarts and power are still spot on, especially in debates over fact-based policies, integrating AI in government operations, or navigating the complex landscape of information warfare. These issues all reflect the tension between expert authority and public opinion that Machiavelli identified centuries ago. At the heart of his ideas was a split between two kinds of knowledge, the kind that seeks truth for its own sake and the kind aimed at solving real-world problems. Theoretical knowledge is about uncovering constant truths, while practical knowledge helps you make effective decisions based on current situations and resources. Both are crucial in political strategy, but they march to different tunes and often clash over which direction to take. When theory steps in, it brings logical consistency, factual accuracy, and a polished appearance, even if it doesn't quite fit with what's needed for effective policy implementation. Practical thinking, in contrast, focuses on what actually works, what's feasible, and can adapt to changing circumstances, even if it means letting go of some theoretical ideals. To succeed politically, you need to draw from both knowledge pools, appreciating where each shines and where it may stumble. The power of expertise in politics demonstrates how deep knowledge can guide the ship of the state smoothly, but also how it can stir up new political challenges. Expert insights, particularly in complex areas like economics, public health, or the military, can replace guesswork with solid facts and uncover options that everyday folks might miss. Yet, this expertise can lead to reliance on specialists, human beings with their own agendas, that might not always align with the public good. Plus, it can create problems for democracy if experts' advice goes against popular will. Political leaders need to harness expert power effectively while remaining true to democratic values, avoiding becoming slaves to narrow technical views that miss the broader political and social picture. Nailing this requires designing systems that accept expert input without giving away the final decision, which needs a broader view than pure expertise provides. We see this balancing act today in scientific advisory groups, independent regulatory bodies, and efforts to develop evidence-based policies. These attempts aim to blend the wisdom of experts with the public voice. Here's the bottom line. In politics, theories don't always match reality. Theories are crafted in controlled conditions, but the political world is a wild beast, messy, constantly changing, and fraught with complex dilemmas and disputes. Theoretical models simplify reality to make it more manageable, yet politics is about handling the complexities that theories often brush aside. These models often strive for perfect solutions under ideal conditions, but politics demands solutions that work within limitations and available resources. This disconnect means theoretical advice sometimes misses the mark when applied to actual policy problems. For folks in political leadership to really make a change, they've got to turn big ideas into practical action plans and switch up those plans to suit real-world situations where theories fall short. This job takes skills beyond just crunching numbers and theories, like sharp political instincts, clever negotiation skills, and a good grasp of the tricky business of putting ideas into practice, which you don't always pick up in school. Academics and policy pros often find themselves in this ongoing tug-of-war, trying to keep their own thought process intact while being effective players in politics. Intellectual work should follow where evidence and logic lead, not chase after political considerations or what's popular at the moment. However, if they actually want to have an impact, these experts need to adapt their insights to fit political realities, build coalitions among different groups, and sometimes settle for solutions that aren't perfect in theory. If you stubbornly stick to complete independence, your brilliant ideas might just gather dust on a shelf. On the other hand, if you bend too much to political whims, you could end up losing credibility as an expert. Finding that sweet spot between holding firm to intellectual integrity and working effectively in politics means understanding and respecting both sides of this fence. Think tanks, universities that collaborate with the government, and public thinkers trying to bring academic insights into political discussions are all trying to find this balance. Also, there's this whole political thing where knowledge gets used as a tool or even a weapon in debates. Politicians might lean on research or expert opinions, less to find the truth and more to win arguments. This can twist the research itself and mess up political discussions because the goal shifts from seeking truth to winning points. Rivals often try to discredit research or promote their own experts, making it harder to figure out who's actually got the best insights. This muddying of the waters can erode public trust in experts and make it tougher to use research in genuinely improving policies. The big task is to create systems that keep research honest and make sure its insights can positively influence politics. This might involve setting up independent research centers, having transparent review processes, and improving how scientific findings are communicated so people can better evaluate different claims. The goal isn't to cut knowledge off from politics, that would make it useless, but instead to ensure that politics helps, rather than hinders, the process of creating real understanding. Part 20. Machiavelli's influence echoes through time, reaching far beyond his own era and place. His way of looking at politics offers a useful perspective for understanding the shifting dynamics of power, continually adapting to fit the modern world. What makes his work stand out isn't some particular policy he endorsed or any specific structure he developed, but his method of analyzing politics, staying grounded in reality rather than abstract theories, and prioritizing practical results over moral perfection. His line of reasoning has spread across a variety of fields, from international relations theory to workplace studies and strategic business apps, arming us with intellectual tools that have proven valuable across different eras and cultures. However, his name also sparks discussions about the delicate balance between achieving political goals and maintaining moral integrity, an issue that democratic societies continue to grapple with today. For those looking to use Machiavellian ideas to address contemporary political challenges, it's crucial to understand his legacy without slipping into outright manipulation or pure cold-bloodedness that some, perhaps unfairly, associate with his ideas. The task for upcoming political thinkers is to appreciate Machiavelli's lasting significance while wrestling with the limitations of his ideas in contexts he couldn't have perfectly anticipated, but are still akin to the situations he explored. As we wrap things up, let's make sure our final analysis connects all the dots. Machiavelli's methods and key concepts, their relevance in today's world, the ongoing debates and criticisms, future adaptations, and a final call on his enduring impact. The shake-up Machiavelli brought about continues to affect how folks examine politics by underscoring the need to base studies on real-world observations over grand theories or utopian visions. By focusing on the nitty-gritty of politics instead of an idealized version, he set the foundation for today's systematic approach to social sciences. This empirical angle often challenges easy assumptions about human behavior, institutional operations, and the potential for political reform. But it also provides more reliable guidance for action since it considers things as they are instead of as we wish them to be. Machiavelli's legacy offers not just specific analytical tools, but also a mindset, questioning the official narratives, being conscious of unexpected outcomes, and understanding that good intentions don't always lead to good results. These perspectives are essential in any era, though their implementation must evolve along with technological advancements, societal changes, and institutional shifts. Even now, the relevance of Machiavellian analysis is evident when addressing issues troubling democratic systems, international organizations, and reform initiatives worldwide. His insights on the tension between expert advice and public opinion shed light on current debates around technocracy, evidence-driven policy, and expertise's role within democracies. Furthermore, his views on the connection between economic inequality and political stability provide a framework to approach current fears over democracy's future, the surge of populism, and the political fallout from globalization. His exploration of conspiracies and elite competition gives us fresh angles on today's challenges, from deepening political divides to corporate management and international diplomacy. His thoughts on luck and chance reshape how we approach risk management, planning for what's to come, and building resilient organizations in an era marked by rapid technology advances and an ever-unpredictable world. But most importantly, his focus on what it truly takes to govern effectively remains crucial for anyone running an organization, crafting policies, or creating systems that need to transform intentions into real-world results. The tricky components of Machiavelli's political philosophy invite deeper questions about the relationship between power and justice, issues that can't be solved through theory alone but require real-world judgment, tailored to the specifics of each unique context. Machiavelli shook things up by pulling political smarts away from old-fashioned moral values, letting us get a real-world view of how power actually operates. But this shift brings up whether politics based solely on practicality can truly support human well-being and teamwork, while focusing on flexibility and sharp judgment might make us better at rolling with the punches, it can also throw off the consistency and planning that good laws and cooperation need. Fixating on elite leadership and institutions, he may miss out on democratic essentials like citizen involvement and political fairness, key to today's idea of a fair government. You can't just solve these tensions in theory because they reflect real clashing values that don't always fit together neatly. The strength of Machiavelli's ideas isn't in handing out clear answers to moral and political puzzles, but in spotlighting the compromises we have to make and arming us with the tools to make hard decisions when our values clash. As political realism grows, it must tackle the new challenges brought on by tech changes, global ties, and environmental shifts that are rewriting everything from country borders to who really holds power. The digital age is shaking up political conversation and control in ways old thinkers didn't see coming, and global markets are tying political systems together in new and complex, yet often limiting ways. Climate change pushes us toward long-term planning and international teamwork that might be too big for current setups, causing new friction and instability. With AI and automation turning traditional roles, economies, and teamwork upside down, parts at the core of political theories, we need to stretch Machiavelli's approach to explore new avenues by blending his age-old insights on power and leadership with today's global reality. The real value in Machiavellian thinking isn't in doling out step-by-step advice for leaders or governments, but in giving us a way to think practically about politics without getting stuck chasing moral perfection or pie-in-the-sky theories. This approach keeps its value because today's political challenges mirror the same old tug-of-war between personal aims and community goals, ethical dream versus real-world needs, balancing what's immediate with what's to come. Just as Machiavelli saw back then. Human nature hasn't changed much since Machiavelli's 1500s, so the nuggets of wisdom from that time about what humans want, how leaders work, and how groups act still help us make sense of politics today. Key pieces of political life, like the need for solid institutions, handling conflicts and fostering collaborations, and juggling both homegrown and global issues, are hurdles that haven't gone away with time or across cultures. Instead of just slapping Machiavelli's conclusions onto today's issues, it's smarter to use his way of figuring things out to carve out new insights suited for today, sidestepping pitfalls like wishful thinking and moral laziness, which Machiavelli flagged as major stumbling blocks to achieving genuine political outcomes. This means mixing a clear understanding of today's reality with creative thinking about new institutions and strategies that can tackle modern hurdles, while drawing from the political know-how we've picked up over the years. While he started off as just a modest civil servant in Florence, Machiavelli sparked a wave of ideas that still mold our views on power and leadership centuries later. By avoiding comforting yet unrealistic notions about politics, he opened the door for smarter approaches to tackle the timeless issues of cooperation and governance. These insights can either offer opportunities for positive change or pose risks for harmful outcomes, depending greatly on the intentions and objectives of those using them. The true measure of Machiavelli's political wisdom isn't about how nice it sounds in theory or how morally pure it appears. It's about how effectively it contributes to building systems and practices that advance humanity. At the same time, it's about recognizing just how tough and fragile those successes can be. In a world where good intentions are common but effective action isn't, his approach to studying the reality of politics, rather than how we wish it were, remains highly valuable for anyone aiming to make a difference. His impact is felt wherever people favor genuine political action over moral grandstanding, where they rely on concrete evidence rather than abstract ideas, and where they embrace the challenging task of leadership while striving to expand fairness and justice in cooperative efforts.